Hello，我
嗨，宝
上
成。
个第三 doc review Alvin 的
哦，好好，我马上过去，不好意思。他，
啊，咱们先参加那个，然后再说
好好
这个。
好好好，好，拜拜。今天在房呢，包产有人进给我。Holy shit！
Hey Alvin, I have a background question. I probably missed previous discussion. Are we implementing the studio recommendation card or not this time?
I think. Oh, I looked at it again. I think you could just implement that in like Nitrate or like the Yoda framework. I think it's just you would just add like a new campaign, similar to what we did for like PDG or like the LCR banner.
So we are building it this milestone. Because the no-go in your design doc confused me. I thought we are building that, but the no-go said will not support recommendation service.
Oh, I mean, I meant like this. I meant that the service will not support it.
Oh, you mean the studio one and LCR one will talk to different services?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
I think most people are here. Yeah, I invite everyone to go through a walkthrough of this design doc because Joel had questions about it. So I just want to I think the format of the agenda for today is I kind of just walk through it, and if anyone has any confusions in some parts of the design, then feel free to like raise any questions. Yeah. So the objective of this, of what we want to achieve is we want like a kind of like a recommendation service that we can use to reuse for like different platforms to surface different recommendations to like platforms such as like LCR and Kiosk and like other third-party clients. So some requirements is that the recommendation should be rankable. They should be able to be dismissed, and they should be able to be used by different surfaces like third-party LCR and etc. Also, it should be low latency because we might attach it to important RPCs like such as get creator channel and get creator video, and we don't want to slow those down. Non-goals is to make this usable for Creator Studio's channel dashboard, which is this thing, which is like the studio landing page when you go to Studio. Yeah, Joel.
That part I don't understand. So if I want to make recommendations, right?
Yeah.
Then like why doesn't it go there? Like we put it everywhere except there.
Yeah. So then the thing is their architecture doesn't really support like this kind of the pattern that we're trying to achieve very well. Because the way they do it is they just have like one thin service layer that has like a bunch of one-off logic that relies on these things called producers. These producers are like bits of logic that map one-to-one with like their own recommendation. So then, for example, like the ideas for you producer, it would encapsulate like, it would be like, it's a class that will encapsulate logic, which would do everything, which would like execute all the logic to like generate just specifically the ideas for you, recommendation, including like calling RPCs and stuff.
So is this a non-goal for this iteration, or is this a non-goal forever?
It's a non-goal forever. If you want to add, if you want to add a recommendation in Studio, you would have to follow their guide here to create one. But right now, I don't see how we can use this service to like kind of reuse the logic for like the Studio page, unless we like really work with them to change their framework to kind of support something like this.
I have a question on that. I made a comment in the doc, but looking at one of the producer type, it looks like they kind of thought about supporting one producer, multiple cards. So I think we might just need to like look into that a little bit more and talk to them to see if this can be supported.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Talk to them. Yeah. About.
Yeah. And then the second point I want to make is, I mean, we can still use this, right? Like, it's just that in the worst possible case, if we put n card in Studio, we have to call the service n time because they don't cache or whatever. And we make n stupid producer for it. So it could still be supported. It's just going to be really inefficient.
Yeah. It could be supported, but it would be inefficient unless we change a lot of their coding patterns.
I don't want to derail the whole meeting on this, but like, let's just let's just think about this. I think your non-integration forever is not feasible, Alvin.
Yeah.
So like, I think that's acceptable for like V1, but I don't think that, you know, we can reasonably say that it's acceptable long-term. So like every time you want a recommendation, you're going to have to do it twice now. You're going to have to do it once in the system. You're going to have to do it once in the,
Okay.
and so like the question that I have is like, well, you know, is that good? Or should we not do this in that case? You know, should you write the studio one and then like flip it around so that we ingest the studio one? I just like something to think about, but like I don't think that this is viable long term.
Okay. Yeah, I think that probably calls for a meeting with like whoever's owns the studio service to see what we could do to make it work then. Yeah, Joel, that's.
Yeah, sorry, I might have missed something, but I don't really understand the producers and how they work. But can the producers be powered by this engine or no?
Not really, because so then this engine or this service, it returns all the recommendations, except a producer is only meant to fetch one recommendation at a time. Like if you fetch all the recommendations in one producer, there's no way to share it with like another producer right now.
Okay, so so to get it to work, you're saying that it would have to call the new service multiple times, which is just wasted, right? Like each of them. Okay. I'm curious, like, how does that work? Like, how does the producers thing work? Because how does it know which producers to even call in the first place? Doesn't something to tell it? Like,
so they have like a static map of all the cards, and then they just call everything. It's not really like customizable. They just call all the recommendations, if that's what you're asking.
oh,
They
so
just make
basically,
yeah.
so basically, it's like I have like, so say I have like 3 recommendations, right? Like just like to simplify it, like the dashboard has 3 total
Yeah,
recommendations.
you just try to load them all.
They try to load them all, and if the service returns nothing, then it doesn't show that card. So,
Yeah, something like that. Like for instance, if the ideas for you, if all the cards got dismissed and there's nothing else to recommend, or there's no campaign that like matches your criteria for your channel, then it just won't show up. I think that's how it works from me skimming like through the code and stuff.
Okay, let's take an AI and come back to this.
Sure. Okay. So one thing we need to address is dismissals to never show up again. So for that, it should be pretty simple. Each recommendation will just have their own ID, and they'll just store the dismiss flag in Cappy in live creator settings through the update creator channel RPC. And then as for the recommendation service itself, we're gonna build it in LMS because it's gonna be called from a bunch of second party and third party APIs. For overview, the logic just goes, we start out with all possible recommendation messages. We filter out the messages that are already dismissed. And then from there, we build data dependencies for whatever messages are left over that are undismissed, and then using the data dependencies, we'll compute if the recommendation should, if the leftover messages should be recommended, and that'll be into the response. Yeah, the client interface, it will just be like a simple, it'll be just an empty request with external channel ID. In the future, we might need the recommendations for like, we might need recommendations for some specific client state in LCR that we cannot determine in the server. For example, like, I don't know, maybe we open like the live creation MDE, and we want to get recommendations just for that. It wouldn't make sense to like, it would only make sense to give it like surface relevant messages or recommendations. So for that, we could just provide like an enum for what the context is, for like what context the user or creator is in. For example, like they're in live creation MDE, they're in the managed list, they're in maybe some new LCR landing page. And then I also had this alternative option or design for like what the interface could look like, which is just a bunch of like include like recommendation X, include recommendation Y, include recommendation Z, so that it would be easier for, so it'd be more like flexible for clients to call this service to get what recommendations they have. This option might be better if this would be like, this was kind of the option I was thinking about if we wanted to, support like the studio, if we wanted to support like calling the service from studio. But like on the second thought, it kind of makes the interface like super confusing, so I kind of decided against it.
Can you not achieve the same thing with the enum that you have? Passing an array of enums, right, instead?
Yeah, but then for this, the idea would be you would just call it once every time you want a recommendation. So it would still be like a one-to-one mapping. So if you only wanted SND tips, since producers only map one-to-one per recommendation, you would just call this with SND tips for that producer, and then call turn on midrolls for like a turn on midrolls producer, and like.
Oh, I just meant like in the request, if you wanted to just simulate the Boolean, you could just also pass in just a list of enums, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it could just be a list of enums too.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you go with the enums.
Yeah. And then, yeah, the interface for the output, it would just, the preferred option would just be like an enum. For example, if they're eligible for super chat, we would just pass in like a super chat eligible enum in a list of recommendations. Or actually, so this will probably get a better picture. Yeah, Joel.
So what would happen if, let's say the video infrastructure team wants to send a recommendation based on like some logic that they have going on in their like video processing side? Like, do they have to, like, how does that work?
If video infrastructure, I imagine that if that's a possible recommendation, we would just make that RPC call to whatever service they have every single time. And if the signal comes out positive, then we will just recommend that.
What do you mean? Like we're polling them?
Yeah, we would poll them.
I think this is where I was getting a little bit confused because, like we have the ability, like, I mean, I don't think that is that a good pattern? I don't know. That kind of goes boring in my head, so I'm not super keen on that.
What's the use case you're talking about, Joel? Like,
well, let's say that they have discovered that, you know, that, I mean, well, what are the ones I could pick? I'm trying to pick something that's not already done, but like, let's just say stream health, right? Like, let's just say that they're not getting enough bytes, right? And the reason that they're not getting enough bytes is that because the bit rate is too high, right? And you know, or they're using an encoder that is garbage, right? So like part of the problem that we have here is that for the, you know, when the video infrastructure team want to kind of like fix up recommendations, like then they make a cross-team request to us, we deny it, and then nothing happens, right? So it's like, how do we enable other teams like video infra and potentially, you know, shopping or whoever to make these things? So that's why I was like, the client request proto confused me a little bit because it was asking for a recommendation, not making a recommendation. You know what I mean? And so I'm just trying to, because part of I think what could happen here is like somebody makes a recommendation and then we have to like pipe it out to all of these other things, right? Like we have to actually show it. You know, we potentially have to show it through the 3P API. We potentially have to show it through LCR. Yeah.
Okay, so the engine thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, but the engine is exposing an API to retrieve recommendations, right? As opposed to also allowing a generic custom recommendation that anyone can send to traders. Is that, wait, so are you saying that the project includes both sides or is it just retrieving it? Because like, if, for instance, in this case, if the video team wants to add a recommendation, they can just modify the proto by adding a new enum and then adding the logic code to retrieve it, right? In the recommendation handler or whatever to retrieve the recommendation. But if you want to make it like way easier for them to just call an API, that's like a totally different use case.
Right, but I guess what I'm trying to say is like, you know, this is what I was asking about this because like, what does the service do? Like, if they want to write that recommendation, like, do they then have to, like, they have this like separate service that's in a separate like main loop that's like running and doing stuff, right? And the easiest thing for them to do is to push that recommendation out, right? So I think I mean, there's lots of ways to crack this nut. We don't have to do it exactly the way that I'm saying. I'm just bringing it up that if they then write this recommendation, and where does this recommendation service live? I'm assuming it lives in LMS or LCS. Then LMS and LCS then have to, like, how do they communicate with the infra services?
Yeah, we could probably have some separate service that, like offline service that they could call to write to some storage that you have, and then we'd make an RPC to that storage, but I'm not sure if it'd be too complicated.
Yeah, we could do pub sub channel, like that's rattling around in my head too, but I think something needs to happen here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like, we have to also understand what the use case is. Like, for instance, if they send a recommendation and they add it to like a pub sub or something, it needs an expiry because what if the users never look at it and doesn't make sense anymore, right? Like, what if they never look at LCR and then that message is still hung around? Like, we need to know. So, like, I think it's if we want to go that route, like make it super flexible, we would also need to design around, like, you know, how long the message is available for, or, like, you know, things like that. Can they modify the message once it's sent out, or the recommendation?
You know, my understanding is that to a certain, I mean, I don't know the details, but we should ask them. They can already do this for like stream health. And so, you know, I just want to make it easy for them. That's kind of like a key thing. It's like, I want to make it easy for these other teams to be able to do this. So you know, if the use case is, you know, you go and modify our code, then that's fine. But I'm still kind of like wondering about, you know, we don't want this RPC kind of like polling some other service every, you know, n seconds or whatever the case may be. So something needs to be.
Well, we still need to poll our service, right? Like, for instance, LCR has a get broadcast serve that gets pinged every 5 seconds to determine the stream health. Otherwise, because otherwise it doesn't know how to update. There's no like push mechanism, so that it doesn't know how to update the UX or UI.
Is that true? I swear to God, Adam has told me 2 different things over the last few years. And
There's
so
no
I'm permanently perplexed.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that, you know, like Do is working on getting the 3P push API streaming gRPC done for third party. And so it would be, you know, like I think that it's, you know, we probably need to get rid of this polling thing at some point. You know, we're looking to move to a whole push-based API on the 3P side, right? And there's been conversations about how we get to push API on the 1P side, but I just wouldn't bake in polling here. I just wouldn't do it, especially given that we're trying to get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Chat polls as well, and you know, there's a little bit of like debate about whether moving chat away from polling to streaming would be cost effective, but like it was built wrong in the first place. Like chat polls YTMS every 250 milliseconds, and nobody likes that. So I don't think it's a pattern we should copy.
Yeah, then maybe we should.
Yeah, I think that's a more requirement than that.
Yeah, maybe there should be like something in the design to transition to push base, like that mentions how to transition to push base. Or are you saying the push base should be like the design for the first iteration of it?
Well, I'm saying where you start polling is, you know, look, we can't update the client right now. The client's still going to poll, right? But I don't think we should poll all the way down, right? Like, I don't think we should fan out that polling. So if, you know, if the infra team want to send a message to this service, you know, like, I think this service should just store it until the client can poll it, and then it clears it out, right? I mean, I think that's how, isn't that how chat works? Like, it goes into YTMS, and then it gets pulled out of YTMS, but it gets pushed into YTMS somehow, right? No, we don't have to talk about chat. Never mind that. But, I mean, you get my drift though, right?
Yeah, I think for the initial set of recommendations, I don't think we need to worry about that yet, because it's mostly just going to be calling RPCs to video broadcasts and like maybe one other service. Yeah, maybe something to think about later.
Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, the response was just.
Don't like,
yeah.
This is where I'm kind of like, just don't, I mean, the thing that I'm sort of like getting at is things that like where you have this enum type, you know, you just gotta, I mean, yeah.
I mean, you just fetch, like, if you add the backend for like a pub sub or something, you would just fetch from a different source, right? Like, you would just fetch from the pub sub instead. So like this, you still need the API part where you're taking requests to get and returning requests. Unless you're gonna go with like a full listener approach, where it's like the client is actually gonna open a persistent connection.
I gotta go, but I just want to. Can we just see like some design for this use case? Like, I just want to know how it'll be handled in the future, even if we don't do it now, Alan.
Sure. Yeah. 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 I think we're at the end. I don't think this other part is that important. It's just like implementation detail stuff.
Yeah. It was the request response which confused me, because like the quote unquote request, if you're the infra team wanting to push something out, requires more than just a channel ID, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think there's another kind of client here. And I just want to, if we can just see some design for that, or at least a plan for how that's going to happen. So I feel like there's two AIs. One is the studio dashboard problem, and then the other is like the infra problem. Like, I'd like to see how those can be handled.
Sure, let me add that.
Thanks. I got to drop. This has been useful. Thank you, Alvin.
Cool, thank you.
So it sounds like Joe actually wants a design for like
full on like messaging.
a generic way for the other system to push new messages into this system for serving.
I think it would be more complicated than that, because there's cases like, for instance, like if you need to update it, you need a unique ID, right, to track your class. But there's also things like, what if the client doesn't want to show everything? Like, how are they going to filter it out without something to say? If video infra just pushes some random new thing, is there some sort of like category or some enum that says this is like a video infra? You still need something, right, to determine what type of recommendation it is, because I don't know if it makes sense for like CRT card, like a studio dashboard card to show like infra related stuff.
And I think your understanding about the thing, I think is correct, that even the stream help today, it just infra call live notifier. We store that in the ingestion table, and then LCR just open broadcast status, which read from that table and then send it down. We don't have anything more fancy than that, I don't think.
Right. So I think as requirements go, if we're gonna support that in the first version at least.
Yeah, I might talk to some of you on like live notifier, how that works. So I could, that makes sense that like maybe we could use live notifier as like kind of one of the push mechanisms. And maybe I'll talk to Do, if you don't mind, how like maybe we could integrate that into this design.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we should at least mention how that pipeline works right now, just so everybody who really don't understand where some of these messages would be coming from. But sure. Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, I'll probably set up a meeting with you sometime this week. Let me know anyone else if you guys want to join, but otherwise feel free to drop off. Thanks.
Cool.
See you.
Hello，抱川。
出来了，他刚才有一个 latency， 我看到2个，我却无法看到你。来吧，让我来看看哪儿出问题了。
行，我 share 一下我 screen。我觉得艾文好惨哦，就是直接被否决了。
对，主要是这个时间完全不够做这么 fancy 的。
对啊，他如果 push 的话，就整个都得重新，就整个 system 都得重新搭建。
而且我们根本不知道这个 recommendation 将来是不是会被 deprecate 呀，就是它有必要这么fancy吗？
我觉得可以先跟 Studio 先聊一下，然后如果 Studio 他们没有这个必要的话，我觉得这些东西都不一定非要做那么 fancy，除非真的是一起做的话，那个可以。哎，等一下，我的鼠标怎么不？稍等一下。
没事没事。
OK， 可以了。OK， 然后看一眼啊，现在是那个 Studio， 你看，就这个是 on 嘛，对吧？然后这个选的 conservative， 然后这是，哎，这勾怎么又去掉了？再试一次，可能就这勾的问题。但我刚刚是 double check 了呀，再来一次。现在看一下是勾是有的，然后这个 conservative， 对吧？然后现在我们就来。
别人也在用这个 account，就是。
可
能别人也在改这个 setting。
有可能